Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrea Sellers, and I am the Assistant Director for Regional Engagement with NC State's Alumni Association. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. Please utilize the Q&A function to submit questions throughout the webinar. The recording of this webinar will be available and sent out to registrants once it's been uploaded to YouTube following the conclusion of the event. This will be a 75-minute webinar that will wrap up at about 7:45. Now, I am really excited to introduce our co-moderator this week, Sheri Schwab. Sheri is the current Vice Provost for Institutional Equity and Diversity and a member of the Chancellor's Cabinet. She served as the interim in this role starting March 2018 through being hired permanently in the role October 2019. She serves as the Chief Diversity Officer as well as the university's Title IX, ADA, and EEO officer. She is a 1997 graduate of NC State's College of Education, and she got her Master's of Education in Counselor Education with a higher education focus. She received her undergraduate degree from University of Kansas in psychology and her JD from the NC Central School of Law in 2009, and she is a member of the NC Bar. Prior to serving in her current role, Sheri served in the precursor to the OIED as the Vice Provost for Equal Opportunity from 1997 to 2002. Then she moved to the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences in roles including the Assistant Dean for Personnel, and then from 2011 to 2018 as the Associate Director of Cooperative Extension and Director of County Operations. In all these roles, her work has centered around working on issues of civil rights, discrimination, and harassment prevention, and centering diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. Sheri, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Great, thanks. It's amazing to be here. I've been looking forward to this since the day you all set this up and invited me to be a co-presenter. So I really appreciate it. And I'm super glad to be here with all of my fellow alum from NC State as well. And yes, College of Education, not engineering, but to all the engineers, great. And College of Ed is a great place to be. So I'm excited to be here. I'll share just a minute about what my office does, the Office for Institutional Equity and Diversity. I know many of you, as I said in the intro, one of the precursors was the Office for Equal Opportunity, and then OIED came together from several different offices. And Rupert, I know you played a role in the development of the Vice Provost in the office that I actually have now. So you were one of the first vice provosts working in diversity and inclusion. So I'm happy to be following in small of your very large footsteps to fill. So thank you for that. But in the Office for Institutional Equity and Diversity, we do the EEO kinds of compliance around Title VII and Title IX, which is gender discrimination in education, or prevention of gender discrimination in education, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and all religious accommodations, all the forms of protected by law forms of discrimination and harassment. So we do that side of the house. We also do the diversity and inclusion side of the house. We have certificate programs in diversity and inclusion and equity, helping people at the individual level as well as the institutional and organizational level around this area, and provide training to students, faculty, and staff. And we also have our bias impact response team. It's just a couple of folks, so a small but powerful team, people who respond to incidences of bias on campus that are reported to us, hopefully using a restorative justice model, a restorative practice to help all of us. And it ties really well into the work of neurodiversity, thinking about how we navigate through our social context. And then we have 4 centers in the Office for Institutional Equity and Diversity as well. The Women's Center, the GLBT Center, Multicultural Student Affairs, and the African American Cultural Center. So a pretty broad umbrella, but we're working hard every day, and we know you all are as well, around equity, diversity, inclusion. for our NC State. So just a little bit about that. I know Andrea will put in the chat our webpage where you can go and find out more about the Office for Institutional Equity and Diversity. You can also, from there, subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletter. So I know a lot of you all as alumni want to stay engaged and in touch with what's going on and what are the events and what are topics going on. So I really encourage you, and as alum, you're welcome to. Rupert, you too, if you'd like to subscribe to our digest to keep track of sort of what's going on across campus. And I also want to just give a shout out to the Alumni Association magazine. For this most recent, let's see if I can get this centered in here, the most recent alumni magazine, which hopefully, if you're a member, you can learn about that. But the whole edition, or a large portion of this month's edition, was around diversity and inclusion at NC State. So you can find out a lot of great what's going on, what people have been working on. There's a great interview with Melanie Flowers, who I know is one of your prior co-moderators, and Eric Moore, an alum himself. So anyway, that's just a little bit there as intro, but let me get to why we're all here tonight. We're here to talk the final session of 6. So I know that this has been a great journey for all of you, but let me introduce Dr. Rupert Nacoste. You teach a wildly popular social psychology course called Interpersonal Relationships and Race. And your new book, To Live Woke, uses your experiences of growing up in segregated Louisiana to serving in the US Navy, as well as your experiences as a professor at NC State, where, with our students, and in your other many engagements around diversity and inclusion. You use these stories to help us understand what we need to learn in order to act with people who are not like us, whether because of their race, religion, sexual orientation, or any number of differences. And Rupert, I remember this vividly. I was just a graduate student, but the first time I heard you share your stories, but the way that you did it with your storytelling ability and your ability to pick up on nuance of social interaction. So this is really a treat for me to be able to co-facilitate here tonight and I so enjoyed reading your book. But Dr. Nacoste, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think you're going to start with a reading of a couple readings, maybe. I think you picked 2 chapters. So I'm going to let you introduce them and take over from there. How's that sound?
That's great. Thank you, Sheri.
You bet.
And once again, my thanks to the Alumni Association for setting up this education series that allows me to talk with community members about the interpersonal intergroup issues we are struggling with as a nation. As some of you have heard me say, I have the long view. I have been working on interpersonal intergroup issues since my time in the United States Navy, 1972 to 1976. I do indeed have the long view. And in that long view, I can see that we are at another important transition point in dealing with intergroup issues. We as a nation have gone through other transitions. Before my time, the enslavement of African people, onto the emancipation, onto Reconstruction, onto my growing up time in time of Jim Crow legal racial segregation, onto desegregation, onto conversations about diversity, and now onto conversations about diversity and inclusion. Right now, we are in the newest stage, neo-diversity, an interpersonal situation in which we all have to encounter and interact with people who are not like us, people who do not look like, sound like, believe like, or love like us. This last installment of this education series covers chapters 39 through 46 of my book, and I have given those chapters the theme for this evening, Developing Interpersonal Leaders for a Neo-Diverse America. For this last installment of this education series, then, I will focus on my claim that we all can and must be engaged in anti-bigotry work. With that claim in mind, tonight I am starting with a reading of chapter 40, An American Eclipse. I don't teach in the summers. Sometimes I write. Summer of 2017, I was a lazy bum. I spent the summer reading for fun, novels, literary fiction, young adult fiction, with 1 or 2 nonfiction books. One of the nonfiction books was David Barron's American Eclipse, which really hit me because in an interesting social context, the story told showed how tethered we are to multiple intergroup histories. Neodiversity, you see, is not an ahistorical idea. I could not have come to the idea of describing our current social psychological environment as neodiverse without understanding the intergroup history of America. Each intergroup historical period has had its own level of social psychological darkness, foreboding and dark ways in which people were socialized to think of each other as only members of groups, us versus them. Summer 2017, as we were coming to an actual eclipse, I was reminded of the intergroup histories of our nation and the dark social psychological remnants of each period. No part of our history is untouched by the one-time American enslavement of African people. That thought flashed into my mind as I began to read American Eclipse. I picked up American Eclipse for my summer book stack to break away for a little while from my summer reading of fiction. A nonfiction book, American Eclipse, is about early American astronomers and their attempt to observe and measure the total eclipse of the sun in 1898. Within 2 pages of reading, in setting the context of the lives of astronomers in that time, the author talks about the Civil War ending and that end motivating scientists to get to work. That's when I had that first flash thought. Nothing in the psychology of American enterprise is uninfluenced by the one-time enslavement of African peoples. To see, observe, and measure the effects of the eclipse of 1898 meant heading to the then still somewhat untamed American West. At that place and time, people yet remembered George Armstrong Custer's attempt to eradicate Indians. People still talked about Indian savages. No part of our history is untouched by the unfair, genocidal treatment of American Indians. Yep, that flashed through my mind as I read. I went on learning the history of American astronomy, enjoying the writing, enjoying the well-written story that includes the inventor Thomas Edison, among other inventors and scientists interested in the eclipse. Those scientists included a name I didn't know because, well, because this person was a woman scientist, Maria Mitchell. Another flash thought. Nothing in the psychology of the American enterprise is uninfluenced by the too long resistance to acknowledging the powerful intellect of women. Let me just say this. If you are at all interested in early American scientific endeavors of astronomy and a bit about early meteorology, American Eclipse is a fun 5-star read. In it, you get real glimpses into the actual lives and motivations of a bunch of eclipse-obsessed scientists, their technological challenges and human adventures leading up to their chance to see and measure the 1898 total eclipse that could be observed from America. You see, this book, American Eclipse, is not about any of my flashes, not the enslavement of Africans, not the stealing of land and life from American Indians, not demeaning views of women. It's just that those are part of the intergroup context of America, even in a book about early American astronomy. In Barron's well-researched book, American Eclipse, there are statements made by people in 1898 that are the same cringeworthy statements some people make today about Blacks, American Indians, and women. That is why it is more than fair to say that nothing in the psychology of our 21st century is uninfluenced by our histories of intergroup bigotries. Yet, know this, nothing in our American psychology has been so profound and important as those marginalized and discounted peoples pushing through and defeating America's too many intergroup bigotries. That is why in 21st century America, we arrive at a neodiverse social environment. This time and circumstance, where people from many different groups are free to walk around and be engaged in the American promise of the pursuit of happiness. But given our intergroup histories and our associated long psychological struggle with multiple intergroup bigotries, today there are Americans who find it a hardship to have to encounter and interact with people from so many different groups by way of race, yes, but also sexual orientation, religion, bodily condition, sex of person, mental health condition, gender identity, age, and on and on. Indeed, Recent survey research is clear in showing that lots of Americans are experiencing interpersonal anxiety about this neurodiversity. My knowledge of that research has been the reason that in my activist writing, teaching and writing, I've been calling out to Americans to say, welcome to the future. The future is not coming, it is here and now. I have been making this proclamation loudly because not understanding that is causing a lot of confusion in America. All of the intergroup tensions we are witnessing in America today are because for too long in this country, to organize our daily social interactions, we have relied on false categories: race, sex of person, religion, and sexual orientation. We have relied too much on those false categories for getting through our daily walk through life. Now, don't misunderstand me. There are ways in which these are real characteristics of persons. Look at any photo of me and you will see that I am indeed a big, giant, dark-skinned Black man. Yet that information becomes a false category when people try to use that information, that category, to make judgments to guide the way they interact with me. For too long in America, we have relied on false categories that make us versus them distinctions. We have used us versus them ways of thinking about people to do what? To keep them in their place, to try to keep the world simple. Now today, in the future we are living in, we are seeing that those categories don't work. Those categories are false. It is false, you see, to believe that women aren't smart enough to be engineers, physicists, and mathematicians. It is false, you see, to believe that all Muslims are terrorists. It is false, you see, to believe that gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people have no place at North Carolina State University, where I am a professor, and where we have created and staffed a gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender student center. In the future we are already living, those false categories don't work. Resistance to accepting that social reality is ripping through our whole nation, making too many Americans anxious, tense, and sometimes angry. A white nationalist rally in Charlottesville is only one recent example of that irrational, dangerous anger. Just witnessed all the irrational calls to the police because a Black person is eating lunch, having a picnic in a park, walking into the neighborhood swimming pool. Why does the truth do this to people? Well, since as children, too many people were taught to rely on false categories of us versus them, false categories that now do not work, people struggle. People wrestle mightily with the question, who are among the we and who among the they? Our too long history of relying on false categories is now tearing at the soul of America. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with certain inalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the soul of America. We soil in that soul when we try to rely on false categories. With today's neurodiversity, we must find ways to stop ourselves from using our historical reliance on false cognitive intergroup categories. We must work out this struggle because no matter what, neurodiversity is the social psychological reality we are living in and must find productive ways to manage in our interpersonal lives. Our neurodiversity future is not coming. It is here and now. That's what I say in chapter 40. And because our neurodiversity future is here and now, we need our communities, our nation needs interpersonal leaders. About that in chapter 42, Humanity Forever, I say this: because neurodiversity is our social reality from this point on. That is why it is important to understand that no, it's not just a joke when we hear another person's bigotry. There are no innocent anti-group jokes because those groups are made up of real human beings. That is why in moments when hibernating bigotry roars awake, we need individuals who will speak up against that kind of expressed thinking. We need interpersonal leaders. We must and can train individuals to stand up against bigotry when it comes up in their social interactions with another person. We must and can train individuals to take a public stance against bigotry that comes up during their everyday social interactions. Humanity needs interpersonal leaders who will speak up against bigotry against women, bigotry against the disabled, bigotry against race, bigotry against religion, bigotry against homosexuals, transgender, or the gender fluid. Humanity needs interpersonal leaders who will stand up against bigotry in all its forms to slow and stop the rise of intergroup extremism. Our world needs interpersonal leaders who speak up against bigotry in the small interpersonal moments where extremism starts. That is what the Nobel Prize winner, our Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was telling the world when he said, the greatest tragedy of this age will not be the vitriolic words and deeds of the children of darkness, but the appalling silence of the children of light. The appalling silence of the children of light. Dr. King was referring to all Americans as the children of light. It's time we start acting like it and speak up against the bigotry of stereotypes and jokes that come up in our everyday social interactions. Thank you for listening.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. You know, when I was reading the book, having heard your voice many times, I thought I had heard like, oh, I wonder what that sound like hearing Rupert saying it, and it's so much more, even more powerful hearing you read it for us. So thank you for that. Just really kind of hitting me right here about Dr. King's quote that you use several times throughout your book about the silence of the children of light, that is really would be the tragedy. And I think that's probably why a lot of our folks from in alumni, felt called to come to this series, right? To read this book and think about it. And you talk about it also a little bit in chapter 39.
Mm-hmm.
I think, where, about comparing to the Holocaust, and you met a Holocaust survivor at a university. It's like, and myself, I know I've throughout my life kind of pondered, like, what would I have done? And I think many of us think that what would I have done if that moment were before me? And of course, that was the retrospective of the Holocaust, but I often thought about it with the civil rights movement as well. Would I have spoken up? Would I have known what to say, known what to do, so that I wouldn't be silent in those moments? So I imagine that's why a lot of our folks are here too. And your book gives us a way to begin to think about, well, what does that mean? So do you want to share a little bit? Yeah.
Well, what you have me thinking about is my students in my interpersonal relations race course. When they read Tim Tyson's Blood Done Sign My Name, The History of Race in America, but it starts in Oxford, North Carolina, they immediately make the local connection. And then they say, wait, what would I have done? Would I have been able to stand up against the social pressure? That's the moment when they begin to realize why they are learning about this in a social psychology class, because the pressures are everyday conformity pressures that lead people to be silent, and that silence becomes deadly.
Right. That social conformity part, right? Like we're not aware of, I've also been reading, I read a lot of books, which I know we all do, but this one about the history of white people, from Nell Irvin Painter. And this is really about this concept of where does the construct of race even come from? It is, kind of created in our social context, to help substantiate or allow people to reconcile what the kind of what we were doing to folks, enslaved Africans and to Native Indigenous people. So people had to come up with like a way in their brain to reconcile what they were perpetuating. So do you want to say something there?
That's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm getting at when I talk about false categories that I just read about, what I just read. That is, the idea is you have to come up with some cognitive way of creating us versus them. As soon as you can create the them, then you can do just about anything.
Yes.
They're not like us.
Mm-hmm.
They're not like us. Skin color means they are below us. It doesn't work though, as we are learning more and more.
Right.
I grew up in Louisiana in the Bayou with a set of people that people used to refer to as mulattoes. So I went to school with blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white-skinned Black people.
Mm.
So we always knew it was bullshit.
Like, just pointing this out to y'all.
Like,
You made it up.
Yeah, but you hit an important point here, that is created so that we can then use people. Tim Tyson calls it the thingification of people. You can use people as things because
Yeah.
they are not us, they are them.
Right. And that's what
False
happened
category.
a little bit in the Holocaust, this sort of
Not just a little bit. Woo! Yikes. Yeah, and that went to one of the most extreme versions. The other extreme version is slavery, of course. But those extreme, and that's why my interactions with this Holocaust survivor was so powerful. And that's why I wrote about it. I mean, it was a moment in my life where this little white lady comes up to me, old, trembling, grabs my hand and says to me, "You and I are alike. You and I are alike. We have seen so much separation," she said. Yeah, it's the same thing. False categories that we let loose and it can turn into things that we did not expect.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, on a personal level, had that comparison been something you thought about before, or was that a moment of like an aha, like,
That's a really interesting question. I had thought about it in the abstract. I thought about it in the abstract, but I had never met a person who had that experience. And once I met a person who had that experience, it just solidified it. It just made it so real. I mean, I could see her numbers, the brand on her arm. I mean, I was, oh.
Yeah.
So then here's one of the things. We keep doing this thing. There are these intergroup histories in America, but what we keep trying to do, because it keeps people from developing coalitions, we keep trying to act as if, well, they had that problem. You've got this other problem, and those people don't like you anyway. And so what we do is we create new intergroup barriers.
Right.
Because you don't want those people to realize what this woman was telling me. You and I are alike. I'm a big, giant Black man. Here was this little tiny Jewish old woman looking at me saying, "You and I are alike." That changes it.
Yeah.
That changes it.
Yeah. And a little bit, I don't know if you can talk more about this, about thinking about that themifying the them even, or weifying the we, if we can use it, that happened even among the white identified race. Is it used to be kind of Anglo-Saxons, English, and then people who were Italian, and you talk a little bit about, Italian and Irish and others. And so then there were stratifications of white even along the same principle, right? So I think what you're really trying to elucidate in the book is you can say it's that group, or it was past history, or it was this, but it repeats itself where you can recognize it as this construct,
That's exactly right.
Dangerous construct that we need to identify and work against. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
So what if we could, what if we would just sit back and say, wait a minute, the intergroup bigotry I'm fighting against, I'm doing some of that. What if we could all just say, oh, wait, I'm creating the problem in my own way. I'm feeding the problem in my own way. And if we can do that, if we can take the moment to self-reflect, and I know that's hard, to then catch ourselves when people say, yeah, I have trouble hanging out with Black people, women are fine, and then a transgender person walks in the room and they're like, oh, hell no.
Yeah, right.
That's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
The thingification of people,
Mm-hmm.
us versus them.
Mm-hmm.
And so as long as we keep doing that in any way, we keep feeding the problem.
Right. We do. Well, and you talk about this about,
And if we
people
feed
call
the beast grows.
it's, yeah. The beast is here, fly. You said you're talking about one of the books, a fiction book, like, if I use your name, then you're no longer a monster, right? I have to identify you, but it was in that science fiction book that you kind of quoted as an example here.
Right, I use the thing. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that as soon as the way I teach this is with the first principle, never try to interact with a person as a representative of a group.
Mm-hmm.
Always interact with the person, as this individual. What I use that science fiction story to show is that sometimes people resist that because it then tears up all the way they've thought about the world. It's like, I've been taught all this time that there are these real thems, and you're telling me, no? I'm having an experience that tells me no? Oh, but it's very interesting how the cognitive thing can be worked out. So people do this odd stuff. So they tell their Black friend, well, you're not really Black. You're not like the rest of them.
Yeah. Right. It's like, you're so blank for a blank. Like, you gotta fill in the thing, it's like, oh, you're not like what I've heard, or, it's like, well, you believe that, that's just being fed to you for your social constructs to develop, as opposed to your real lived interpersonal experience with someone. But that those constructs are also what potentially keep us from, we keep our we's together, and you talked about, I call it, like the work, right? Or this was the aha I had from sort of chapter 40, and what you said as well just now is like, it's that anxiety that, you've been taught one way, you've grown up, or you've been socialized in a way of believing in constructs that you rely on, which is human nature in one part, but here they are very harmful, and we have to overcome them. But when you begin thinking about it, or experience, or bumping into it because of these, our neurodiverse context is you're interacting more often with those who have been they to you previously, you get anxiety, paranoia, fragility, shame, all these interpersonal or individual challenges to work through that, right? So how do we find a supportive network to say, hey, this is a natural part of what's going to happen, and you got to keep going? That's the work.
Okay, so that's very interesting. What's interesting is what people end up doing to themselves tells that they shouldn't feel this way.
Right.
Don't do that. Don't do that, because America is still segregated. America is still set up in a way that we don't have enough interaction with each other across all these group lines. So yes, you're going to feel anxiety. Don't act like you're not supposed to, and don't try to hide from it. Live it.
Yeah.
Say, okay, I'm feeling this. I know this is not appropriate, but here it is.
Yeah.
Take a breath. Don't run from it, because if you run from it, what you end up doing is something goofy or something that makes you angry.
Right. I liked that part about in your book about goofy when you
That's not useful. That's not productive.
Right. I think allowing
young people always have a way of talking about things that I like, and I use people acting goofy.
Yeah. Well, I think, in turning this a little bit to the topic about neurodiverse leaders, or interpersonal people who have interpersonal skills to do this, to lead through, and whether that's formally or informally, or what do we need, so we need to kind of, it sounds like we got to do some interpersonal work. We got to do our own individual work, right? And push through those
Right.
areas and get a little bit better at it so we're not goofy at it, right?
That's right. That's right. We have to do our own personal work. Again, never try to interact with a person as a representative of a group. Part of that is don't go running up to the only Black person you know and asking them what you should do. Do some research. Think about your own experiences. Process it.
I think that was
As
a lot.
opposed to trying to find a quick answer, because there are no quick answers.
Yeah, you don't, I was telling Andrea this a little bit is after this summer for our office and you as well, I know, people are like, oh my gosh, this thing has happened. You know, everyone's up, you know, processing through. We've got 20 minutes, can you come to a lunch and learn so that we can fix it? It's like, that's not how it works. You know, there's work, you have to reflect, you have to read, you have to, you can't just walk up to the closest Black person and say, hey, what should I do? You know, you've got to do, which was a lot, I think, of what happened this summer in that catalyst moment.
Absolutely. There is no doubt about it. The panic was everywhere. Corporations were in panic, individuals were in panic. You don't know this, but I have since the middle of June done 35 presentation conversations like this. I'm willing to do it because I can say to people, okay, this is not the fix. Mm-hmm. This is helping you get some framework for what you need to think about. I'm not here telling you you're fixed now.
No, right.
I'm telling you, you got work to do.
Yeah. And we all do, right? We all have work to do. But yeah, folks, you can't just jump into it, read one book and done. You know, it's not a certificate, you know, and we recognize that too. You've got to keep working, you got to stay open, and you learn how to be in the neurodiverse world and be open and have humility and curiosity.
Well, yes. So you talk about skills, but you're right, it's skill development. Mm-hmm. Like with anything else. Mm-hmm. We have been so segregated from each other. Now we have to develop a new set of skills to deal with, to have productive interactions in a neurodiverse world, where we're not freaked out every time somebody different from us walks in the room, or we have to interact in some way. That takes skill development, which means that you have to be conscious about it and intentional about it.
Yeah. Would you say another skill other than the personal, like how do we recover? I think that skill about when you inevitably make a mistake or do something, what about those skills around the oops or the crap or the whatever phrase comes out of your mouth, but how do you recover? How do we use more of a call-in culture than a call-out culture?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I don't like call-out culture. Call in, that's very good. This is where it becomes social, psychological, or interpersonal. People make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And when they do, two things have to happen. First off, they have to admit it to themselves and to the person they made the mistake with. But the other person has to be receptive to the fact that people make mistakes. Mm-hmm. So, pronouns. That's my best example right now. Thing like transgender people when I was growing up. But in the last 10 years at NC State, I had to rework some things in my cognitive network about pronouns. And I made mistakes.
Yeah.
I made mistakes. And my students have like, okay, that was not good, Dr. Nacoste. You know,
they'll let you know, right? I'm sure.
Yeah, they that look in their eye like, yeah. And I catch myself. I go, and I apologize without trying to dissemble, without trying to make it like it was just, no, I am sorry.
Yeah.
That's one of the ways you recover. You just admit it. Just stop talking after that. Don't start saying, but you know, I really don't. Oh, no. I am sorry. And then stop. Now, the other person will respect you more if you do it that way. If you start saying, but, they're looking at you like, I don't want to interact with you anymore. It's the interaction moment, and you have to learn how to accept your mistakes and learn where they come from. Like I said, I'm almost 70 years old. We did not talk about pronouns, but now, one of my students said, Dr. Nacoste, you wrote an article about pronouns. I said, yeah. They said, but you don't have it on your syllabus. You don't have your pronouns. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, now I do.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
There you go. See? And that's, you've got to be, you said humble with humility.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I could do that whole professor thing, right?
Right.
I could be like, I'm the professor, God damn it. You're not telling me. But I don't do that. I keep learning. Notice that. I keep learning.
Keep learning.
Turns out that's the neurodiversity challenge to all of us, to keep learning. Well, we are again, I go back to the fact that we are still a segregated society in a lot of ways. And there are new topics coming up. That is, okay, and my students do this to me, oh my God. When it comes to gender identity, sexual orientation, sexual preferences, all of that jammed together. Okay, wow. There's a lot going on that I know nothing about. Yeah. So I have had students who come to me and talk to me about issues in their lives, and then who say that they want to let me know something about themselves, that they are asexual. Okay, and literally I have to say, you have to tell me what that means.
And that must take humility, right? And you're not curious, like, tell me all about it, but because
I don't know.
Yeah, but you're, some of the emerging areas may be ones we need to understand more in their complexity. So that humility is like how I know one of the questions that was posed was from the group was about providing strategies for dealing with, the word microaggressions comes up a lot in terms of how to categorize, oh, I've said something that I either didn't realize or didn't know, or maybe did know, or just both to, defend against them is the way the question is written, but also to make the offender aware of their actions. So, both if the person who said the microaggression didn't know, that puts the other person in the difficult position perhaps to point it out to them, and do that. So the learner has to have humility, and and then the other person has to take on a position of correcting. So do you have any thoughts for everyone about that side of the equation of being the one to bring something up with grace, with anger, with what's maybe some tips for us?
Okay, so when I talk about tips, and I do talk about tips in the book, when it comes to a moment like that, the idea is to speak into the moment and and this is hard, not to say it in a way that shows anger, but to say it in a way that shows resolve. I am sorry, I don't like that way of being spoken to. I'm sorry, I don't like that way, that kind of language. I'm sorry, it hurts me. And then let it go, and then stop. Because now it's up to the other person to ask you why, or to help to say, I want to understand more. But yes, you can object. Then you get to see whether or not this is going to be a real interpersonal relationship. But object. Don't tell people they shouldn't talk a certain way. Don't do that you stuff. Speak for yourself. speak in the I am offended, it hurts me. But always speak in the I, not the you.
And you can use that tip, whether it's the other, to confront or address what somebody else has said, either about another group. Even if it's not about you or directed at you, you could speak up and say, that hurts me when you say that. Or if it's directed to you, certainly,
exactly
so you can use it for either. Yeah.
That's right. And that's the power of it.
Mm-hmm.
The power of it is that you don't have to be of the group to use that kind of objection. The power of it is to show people, whoa, there are a lot of different people who find this problematic.
Right. Right.
So yes.
The other part I like about that phrase, not only does it work sort of in either one of those scenarios, it also works across, power differentials. Let's say you're sitting there with someone who's in a formal power differential than you. You can still speak to your own way it impacted you, right? And you don't. It kind of neutralizes.
I think so.
Yeah.
No, I think so. I think people are afraid to do that when there's a power difference.
Sure.
Even more so. And then it becomes a matter of whether or not this is an organization I can commit myself to if it goes bad.
Yeah.
The organizations have responsibilities here too,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of setting up some of the things we've set up at NC State, and we need more, but we've done a pretty good job of getting it to the point where people have a place they can go to say, okay, this is going on in my department, this is going on in my classroom, in classrooms I'm in. And so the organization has to set up a space where people can get past the particular person who is being offensive and take it to the organizational level. That helps with the power problem.
Yeah. I think if I can tie into that a little bit, that's one thing that I think has been very helpful. It's still, evolving about our bias impact response team, BERT. We've had, procedures and places for people to report and get institutional support around discrimination or harassment for the protected categories, race, color, religion, national origin, all those for a long time. But it still had, even when I look at the data over time, people are still, it's still difficult to engage that process for unless people, I think what we hear often is people feel like it's got to be big for me to engage that process. The BERT one is the more like, this was, one or two things, but it still impacted me. And we want to be the kind of organization that still responds, even if it's one or two, and so I think that's what we're trying to develop, is having people come forward, but that power differential and even telling the institution about it is a challenge.
Well, it's a challenge also because it's new. It's a new institutional structure. It's a new reality that people have to say, oh, I actually can say something about this.
Great, yeah.
And so it's going to take a while for people to get the idea that that's real.
Yeah.
So we have to keep pushing it and let people know it's not only there, but it's real. Mm-hmm. And it's the same problem with jokes. People say, well, that's not a big deal. It's just a joke. Oh, Dylan Roof's friends said he talked that way all the time before he killed 9 Black people. It's not just jokes. Mm-hmm. And if you don't speak up in the moment, you end up with a Dylan Roof moment. And if a whole society starts doing it, you end up with a Holocaust. It's just a joke. No, it's not.
And I think in the book where you talk about that, you're taking it too seriously, or you're being too PC. We've got many ways that we've constructed now to
right.
keep people from bringing it up. The whole political correctness correction, as a way that keeps people from speaking up, is an interesting kind of new neo way of doing things. But
well, it's interesting that's come up. There's a reason it's come up this way, because when people say that, what they're objecting to is social change. When people could just talk about Black people any kind of way, that was because Black people were lower in the law. When people could talk about women just any kind of way, that was because women were lower in the law. Well, we got rid of that. So now you have to reset. There's a new social reality. And people say, well, that's just political correctness. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's a new social reality.
Yeah.
It's a new social reality. It is real and it's legitimate.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, people, that part of where people gain that awareness or consciousness that that system, there's the law part, and you talk about this in chapter 39, it's personal, right? It's like that law note, that structural part of it in the black and white letter is, I'm not gonna say it's gone, because there are still plenty of laws out there that have some problems that perpetuate that, but in generally speaking. So now you're kind of bringing this to the forefront. You're like, if those structures no longer exist, but you allow them to continue, then it's, you can't rely on that old thing that gave you an out of accountability. Is like, now, well, then it's personal. It's your personal.
I grew up in the Jim Crow South. And people literally could say, because it was true, what can I do? It's the law. Yeah. It was true. Now you can't say that. You know, that's just the way it is. No, it's not. No, it's not.
Yeah. No. Now it's,
and that's causing people a lot of trouble.
Yeah. That it
now it's you. That's right. Now it's on you.
Right. And is your tolerance for intolerance? I love that phrase, the way you've put that question out there. Is your tolerance for intolerance, you know, are you going to allow for that? That comes from the jokes or whatever. Like, if you allow that, you're tolerating an intolerance, and you're silenced.
And the question I ask, that's right. The question I ask is your tolerance for intolerance bigotry itself? And the answer is yes.
I love that in chapter 41, where you describe putting that out there for your class. You know, you've built this up, you've having them question, they're aware, they're gaining awareness, they're kind of like attuning to things. And then I can picture this in your big lecture hall, you know, you pose this question to them and then you just leave it silent. And you look at each one.
And I do that. And I know they know the answer, and I can see them squirming. I can see them squirming. They're like, "Oh, Doc, you make me sick, Dr. Nacoste." Like, I just asked the question.
So where do you think the squirming comes from? I mean, is it their kind of like aha moment of, oh my gosh, you've layered and layered and layered this from a, oh, that's what other people do perspective, but then that you hit them with this moment of, that's me.
That's right. That's the squirming. The squirming is they're doing this thing where they're hearing the question and it's making them think back to things they've done, interactions that they've had. And now they're like, oh. And they're feeling all kinds of anxiety and nervousness and a bit of guilt around those past experiences.
Yeah.
But they want to do better. Yeah.
We all want to do better, right? Hopefully, if we have. That's why we're here.
Look, I believe in America.
Yes.
I keep saying this. We are not a nation of bigots.
I have found you're hearkening to the Constitution and the patriotism that you thread and you espouse and you embody. You know, it has been such a in reading this, particularly perhaps after the difficult election season we've had, where we've called this into question. It's actually been sort of put on the ballot, so to speak, is in some ways around who are we? And it's just amazing. I'm sure when you sat down to write this
Say it again.
Well, about how hearkening to our that we are all Americans, and this patriotism, it's part of our country's DNA and part of our responsibility as citizens to keep moving toward that more perfect union. But you really espouse the patriotism part, and can you maybe speak to a little bit of that as it relates to how you've put together this social psychology construct to write and challenge us all to think about it in terms of maybe our the founding principles, or our current iteration of bringing those principles
Sure.
to life?
Well, one of the things I talk about is I use the fact that I served in the Navy, as did my older brother, as did my little brother. People don't quite process the truth that so many African Americans have been patriotic for so long. We hold these truths to be self-evident, not subject to conversation, not subject to debate. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Okay. If you believe that, okay. If you say you're an American, that's where you start. If you say you're a patriot, that's where you start. So my patriotism is embedded in that. And that's why I talk about it so often in the book. Understand that patriotism and protest are not in competition with each other. They are both very, very American. Very American.
I like that. Thank you. So a little bit here, I know where Andrea's going to ping me any minute now, because this time goes so quickly. I've so enjoyed this. Let's talk a little bit about leadership, about, having, what does it take, in this moment? So what would you say tips for whether you're a formal leader or informal leader, or wherever your situation may be? What are some things that we can do here to bring some of these concepts forward to help foster better interactions and more equity and inclusion?
The first thing I've been telling people when they've asked me that kind of question is, I say this. It starts with self-examination. You are not all right. You are not all right. None of us are. Because we have been socialized in a certain way in America to think about people as them. All of us have. It may not be race. It may not be sex of person, but it could be sexual orientation. It could be gender identity. It could be religion. So we all have to do self-examination first. You cannot be an ally if you don't know who you are in this context of neodiversity. You just can't. Let's get to work. Okay, get to work on you first.
Right.
Get to work on you first. And then, as you're doing that, start connecting to a different mix of people. Look at your social circle. Take a close look at your social circle and see what you see. Most people will see people that look just like them. That's an American problem. Because that's a racial, gender-identified bubble. That's where the work starts.
Yeah.
I believe.
Gotcha. Is there ever a point, you talk about your book's title is To Live Woke, and woke is certainly a new term. When the first time I heard it, I'm like, woke, what's this woke thing? Am I woke? I want to be woke. I was really striving for it. And I realized it's something that someone has to bestow upon you. You don't get to declare.
Oh, well.
Right? I mean,
No.
I don't know.
No. The reason I chose that is because that's the way young people talk. No, the way young people talk is they say they are woke. I'm woke. No, you're not. Okay. People, I know I'm a social justice warrior. I'm woke. I know what I'm doing. I know how to work. Okay, shut up.
Shut up. Read this book. Maybe read a little bit more. Yeah.
Look, my parents did a lot of civil rights, social justice work in their own ways. My father was a voting rights activist. My mother, a school teacher who focused her attention on educating poor. They both did a lot of stuff. They would never have called themselves woke. But I chose this title because I wanted to catch the attention of young people who think they're woke.
Yeah.
He doesn't mean what I mean. Because for me, I'm challenging people to really live woke, not to just declare it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and is there such a thing as too woke? You know, people striving
that's
for
what that's all about.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that's one of those things that social justice warriors, people who really are delving into this, maybe, you know, becoming aware of it and speaking out in a very intentional, you know, outright way. We all still have things to learn, right? So, and advocacy is important.
Right,
and,
exactly.
Yeah. Great. Okay. I think Andrea sent me a question from the audience. So let me try to get this in here. And as education, sorry, this is from one of the group folks, one of the participants. As education professionals, you are used to being around people who thirst for learning. How do you influence people who maybe don't want to learn about, particularly about this topic?
Yeah, that's a really important question because you're right. I'm a professor, so who am I interacting with? But here's the thing, I don't just interact with people at the university. So how do you get other people to think about these things, even if you're not me? What you do is make yourself clear. That is to say, you don't try to educate people. That's a mistake. What you do is talk from your own position, your own perspective about how you see America, how you see the problems in America, how you understand what neurodiversity is. You speak for yourself. People who respect you will pay some attention to that and may ask questions that allow you then to give them more information, something to read and so on. And some people don't want to hear it. You're right. Then you have to decide whether you want to keep interacting with them. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, maybe a little different twist on this question is, you know, maybe this is self-serving, but I'm going to take a little co-facilitator privilege here is, you know, people will often say to me, Sheri, you know, people who don't want to come to the trainings or to, you know, who, you know, just don't want to invest time or don't prioritize it or maybe actively work in opposition to being kind of aware to this. So, you know, how is it that we maybe bring people along who are naturally inclined to this? We've got, you know, sort of the folks who've been working in this space for a while. We've got maybe people who this, maybe as a result of this summer or recent events have gone like, ooh, I need to learn more. They're coming along too. They're kind of in this swell of things. But what about that next group of folks who are maybe like, why are you talking about that? And I think your advice of saying, well, you just kind of share.
That's right.
Tim
Tyson talks about this question that people often ask, why you keep bringing this stuff up?
Oh, why people
we keep bringing this stuff up because we haven't worked on this stuff. We've been hiding from it. So we got to keep working on it, keep bringing it up.
And I think that's a little bit of what I'm sensing in my role too, is where people naturally, you know, they want to know what we're going to do as a university, and that's happening at corporations and you know, everywhere. It's not just NC State, is because it's been brought up and then it dies down, and it brought up and then it, you know, people have the maybe perhaps the luxury or privilege or something else becomes to the forefront. But I don't think, you know, folks who keep it at the forefront don't have that luxury. It's always present. We don't get to like not attend to it or make a choice about whether this is salient today or not. It's salient every dang day, every day. multiple times a day, right?
Yeah, for some people, it's always there, always.
Yeah. And so keeping the energy, keeping the commitment, keeping the work, the accountability, moving forward, those are all very important pieces too.
Yep.
Looks like I have another question, which I am great. And this is awesome that people are submitting questions. So what can NC State do to bring more representation to the table? This is important for student-facing roles all the way to administrators. We can talk about being a safe campus for all, but let's be honest, safe begins with representation. DEI needs to be a map and not a sentence on the website.
Well, that's the really important question that's floating across all higher education institutions. It's been there for a long time. We've gone from talking about diversity to now diversity and inclusion, and nobody knows what the hell they mean by inclusion. Mm-hmm. Well, inclusion is really what we're supposed to be working on. That is creating an environment, not only creating an environment where at every stage, at every component, we are a welcoming and actively welcoming community. So when search committees are set up, how are search committees trained? When people go out to recruit, how are the recruiting people being trained? They're just things that have to be done.
Right.
And that's why I've been speaking to so many groups, particularly on campus. Mm-hmm. So we have a long history. I grew up in the Jim Crow South. People got to get this. There was a time when I was growing up, I knew I couldn't go to certain schools. NC State would be one of them. I didn't know about NC State, but I knew I couldn't go to school there. I couldn't go to LSU, Louisiana State University, because I was Black. Well, it sounds like I'm old, I'm almost 70, but that was only like 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah, long ago.
So we have got a lot of stuff to uncover, dig up, and throw out.
Yeah.
All higher education does. That means there's work. Nothing's going to change overnight. And that's why we each of us has to engage in these activities, in some different activities against bigotry, wherever you are, because the history is long.
I love that, how you just put that, is we all need to work on this, right? I think having that, like really taking that in and understanding that it's the admissions counselors, it's not just the diversity office, it's the admissions counselors, it's the professors, it's even the engineering professors. Like, well, that doesn't play a role in my curriculum or this. I'm like, well, it does.
It does.
Really just like digging in there and taking it apart, and like it applies to everything. If NC State, we can bring representation, numbers, characteristics to the campus in different ways. But if we don't all take the personal accountability and responsibility about creating the environment, in whether it's in the cultural center or the classroom, these places, they all have to have, all of us have to have that personal accountability and do that work and be part of understanding that's what it really takes to make that change.
Absolutely. Just take the idea of being a faculty member. People think faculty members are smart. Yeah, they're smart about one thing. That's what a PhD is. They know really a lot about this. One content.
What?
But do they have the social skills? Do they have the social sensitivities? Do they have the emotional intelligence? Has that been worked on?
Yeah, and I think that is, I think about that a little bit in some of the work that we do. Is like, particularly, I guess for professors, when I think about it for professors, or really any of us, is, there was a point in time when I know we used to use chalkboards, right, to teach, but then came whiteboards that you could erase off and on. Then you might have gotten that fancy little thing where you could put the transparencies on the front top. Then now we've got Zoom and PowerPoint, whatever. You have to learn over time different things. these skills, emotional intelligence skills, working with diverse populations, understanding your own places of privilege and not, those are things we have to learn, and they are critical skill sets to being effective professors, staff members, administrators.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, you're like, yes, Sheri, yep, but it's hard. I think well, that's where that humility comes in, right? Is that we all have to. I heard the president of Dartmouth speak a couple of years ago, and he said, you know, we used to do new student orientation. We oriented the students to the university, sort of saying, you need to come here and fit into what we've created for you. And he said, he described that he started doing faculty orientation to students. He flipped it. He said, so every year they kind of talk about with the faculty, okay, this group of students who are coming to join you now have had different life experiences. You know, think about mass shootings, or, you know, they have a different experience of what they expect. And so it's a both and, right? Come to the university, you need to understand how, you know, how to work through here. But that inclusion says we need to understand you, and we all have learning to do about each other. So
we are so grateful to have received such a resounding response from our NC State alumni and friends. I don't know if y'all know, but we had over 900 alumni and friends register to be a part of this series. And we are so grateful and thankful for each and every one of you. And because of that, we will be sending out a survey via email, hopefully within a week or so, to gauge your interest on topics related to diversity education and to see how we can better provide for you in 2021. It would be so helpful if everyone could take a moment or two when they get that email to fill out the survey and let us know how else you would like to be learning about diversity education and other related topics. Also, before we go, I'm going to open up the chat function here. And I would like to invite everyone to take a moment and share one takeaway, one thing you've learned, or one thing that you are going to do differently because of the time that you put into this series. Please, if you guys would take a second and drop some things in the chat, what are some things that you guys have learned or are going to do in moving forward? Don't be shy, we're all friends here.
I see some great ones going on here. Can everyone see the chats as well, Andrea?
I believe so, yep. Make sure that it's set to panelists and attendees. And
great, okay.
This is great. Use iMessages to bring people into the conversation. Try and engage with other groups different from my own. Let's get their PhD in social justice and education. That's excellent one, Denise. Examining yourself first. Amazing. Linda will be unapologetically Black. Excellent. To say you have offended me is okay. I must educate people more. Thank you for sharing that, Linda. Organic conversations when opportunities present themselves. Self-reflection. None of us are innocent. We all need to get to work. Speak up more and be confident in doing that. Influence others by trying to set a good example. Thank you. Sarah said that she read Blood Done Signed my name and is sending it to her mother.
Oh, great.
Excellent. And rewatching these discussions with your 14-year-old and her friends.
Great.
It all starts at home, absolutely. I just really want to thank you all for taking the time to do this, and especially thank you to Dr. Nacoste and for Sheri for taking the time to engage and and definitely Dr. Nacoste 6 times over. Lots of applause.
Thank you.
And thank you for writing this book. I mean, what an amazing contribution to the conversation that all of America is having, the world. And we're so lucky and fortunate to have you at NC State and to have this book. So thank you for what you've put out into the world for us to learn from.
Absolutely. And thank you again for all joining us and taking this time. It's not easy work. It's, awkward and uncomfortable, and it's hard, but it is so important. And I am so grateful for all of you. And thank you on behalf of the NC State Alumni Association for joining us for the 6-part series following Dr. Nacoste's book, To Live Woke. And as always, I'm going to end it with a go Pack.
Take care.